I just want to do, firstly, a little introduction about the context of this talk and the work I've been doing. Some of you know, some of you don't know, that I've set up a thing called the Centre for Peace Policy Research within the overall umbrella of my Peace Studies Institute, which was set up in 1991, technically, largely through my kind of collaboration with Eileen, because Eileen was a graduate of the University of London. She belonged to this network of graduates under the convocation of the University of London to create an Institute of Peace Studies. And I, was told about this. And because I just graduated from the university and was looking for a job, I got a job working for a committee to investigate the feasibility of setting up a Peace Studies Institute at the University of London. We had funding for only 2 years. But then I carried on with the work, even though it was unsalaried, because I believed in the project so much. And because over those 2 years I'd done such a tremendous amount of networking and academic liaison. I'd travelled to about 20 countries. I'd written to hundreds of professors of peace studies all over the world, and I'd met most of them by the end of the 2 years. And everybody said to me, look, you will be blocked. They won't let you have the funding. You will be, but you must carry on with this work. So therefore, come in, welcome. We're just starting, really. You missed the spiritual bit, and we're doing just into the academic bit now. So the Institute came into being at that point. Hello. Greetings, Ross. Hi. And then a number of projects have been developed from that institute ever since, which initially was based in London, then it was in the Cotswolds, then it's moved around, it's in Wales, now it's in a castle in Scotland. So it's an autonomous academic research institute. And in the last couple of years, this lacuna in thinking at very high level internationally about peace has struck me very forcibly. We have a huge industry involved with defence policy. We have a huge industry involved with intelligence policy. We have a huge industry about security policy, strategic policy. And we're talking millions and millions of pounds, and tens of thousands of academics are thinking through the nuances of Britain and America and Russia and, the whole geopolitics of defence policy and so on. There is nobody thinking about peace policy, which is the glaring, gap in our thinking. Because how are we going to get the peaceful world if our think tanks and our policy makers and then our policy implementers, i.e. the politicians, and the diplomats and all the rest, literally don't know what they're doing? Nobody has thought through a peace policy, either nationally for this country or internationally for Europe, for, the UN, etc. I've searched and I've searched and I've searched, and I'm not kidding. Nobody is doing peace policy research. So being a Tourian, if I see something needs to be done, I just do it. Raise a flag and get on with it. So a couple of years ago, I set up the Centre for Peace Policy Research, and I've issued a couple of papers, one on Syria, which to me is the most glaring, obvious example of why we need a peace policy. And I've been in touch, I'll talk later, but I've been in touch with the Foreign Office about suggestions as to what a peace policy over Syria might look like. And those are ongoing contacts. And I was very interested reading the Times yesterday to see there's a new book out by a Major General Christopher Elliott, a very top military chap, who's written a book called High Command, British Military Leadership in the Iraq and Afghanistan Wars, published this month. And he lambasts the entire military profession in the UK and the Ministry of Defence, which have eaten up millions, billions of pounds of our money and have not produced peace in Iraq or Afghanistan as a result of it. In fact, it's arguably the case that it's made both those countries far more destabilised and our own security far less secure than it was before. And he in this book, which is reviewed in the Times, he says that the problem is that the Army, the Air Force and the Navy are constantly fighting battles for who gets more resources, who gets more credibility, and He quotes the Air Force are actually jealous of the Army getting so many casualties in Afghanistan because it got them kudos and it got them therefore more funding. This sort of doublethink is going on. So even what I'm going to argue is that even in terms of military strategy, peace policy thinking is what's actually needed. Because the purpose of us having armed forces, I will argue, the purpose of us having a defence policy is finally and ultimately to guarantee peace. That's what it's for. And going around the exhibition and seeing Eileen's little voice among the millions who have thought and been influenced by World War I, it makes me all the more determined to carry on with that work. Okay. So, because if we can't get a peace policy now, either nationally or internationally, we're going to stumble into a World War III. I think the statistics are, with the stockpiles of nuclear weapons, with the instability in Ukraine, with the continuing instability in the Middle East, with Russia's economies that are crashing, and yet they still retain a huge nuclear arsenal. I think the need for a peace policy is now an urgent claim, and I respect people that think environmental issues are important, and I understand that, but I've taken a different track. The best way we can help the environment, I believe, is to prevent World War III, because the largest user of energy and cause of environmental pollution on the planet is the combined military of the planet. If you look at it, it's the planes, the ships that are exercising constantly or engaged in war that actually cause environmental destruction and resource use. So that's the context of what I've been doing. And now I want to share just a kind of summary of the active work I've been doing. Could we do questions at the end? Because I've got I want to go through the topics. But do save your point, and I'll do them at the end. Okay, so the first conference I went to, which I want to share, was in Norway. And for those of you that haven't been to Norway, the Norwegians are very good on peace policy issues, and they have a very strong peace movement in Oslo. And I went to a conference organised by a woman called Dr. Evelyn Lindner, who's a German Norwegian, who runs a thing called the Humiliation and Dignity Studies Network. She did a PhD at the University of Oslo on extreme conflict situations involving humiliation. She argued, and she did loads of empirical research interviewing victims of Rwanda genocide and other extreme conflicts, and discovered that basically when people feel humiliated is when they turn to extreme violence. And so she's come up with the obvious counterforce, which is, what's the opposite of humiliating somebody? Is to give them a feeling of dignity. And how can we do that? What kind of social structures, what kind of institutions do we need that give people a feeling of mutual dignity as opposed to humiliation? It was a 3-day event. There were, 50 of us from all different walks of life, mostly Scandinavian. And it was about nonviolent communication and dignity in communication. And we did some practical exercises, we did some role plays and workshops. It was a wonderful experience. And I came away with a lot of fresh inspiration, I think. One of the people there is on the board of the International Peace Bureau, who was in the group. A number of people came and spoke. One of the days was taking place at the Norwegian Institute of Human Rights, which is now part of the University of Oslo. The director of that is a philosopher. And so, can I just get a refill of tea? Is that possible? I've got a problem with it. Great, thanks. And so there was, it was quite a philosophical discussion. And obviously my institute is mainly focused on the philosophical aspects of peace building and peace policy. So I was totally in my element. Okay, the next one I want to show, and like I say, I'm just going to do the vignettes, the tour, and then we can, if you want me to say more about any one particular thing, I can. Okay. The next one I went to was in India, in Jaipur, which was organised by the Jain community. Now, the Jains, for those of you that don't know them, are very close to Buddhists, but Mahavira may well have met Gautama Buddha. They were from the same Kshatriya clan. They were even from the same part of India, I discovered, because I went there physically a bit later on. Mahavira disagreed with Buddha on a couple of technical points to do with karma. Buddha thought that all karma is mind generated and therefore can be mind ceased. If you think correctly, you can purify your karma. Mahavira thought that that's true up to a certain point, but there is also a physical reality to existence. And you can't, and sometimes karma needs to be purified through, through actual purgative practices, through asceticism and through, hard work, actually. And there were some other differences. The other main difference is that the Jains believe in the immortality of the soul. Buddhists tend to believe the soul is an illusion. And with their doctrine of anatta, no self, which is quite confusing metaphysically for some people, such as Christians, who like the idea of an immortal soul. The Jains are closer to them in that respect. But anyway, it was absolutely fascinating to be there and listening to talks by Jain nuns and monks in Jaipur, who've spent years in deep meditational practice. So they have a very, very pure consciousness. They've been cultivating, like medieval monks, this sort of purified mind. And then they look at the world's problems from that perspective. And there were other people there from all over the world. There were people from America, from Sri Lanka, from Nepal, and so on. Anyway, it came to me. They asked. I chaired one of the panel sessions, and very high level of discussion and debate. And at the end of the conference, the organizer, a man called Dr. S.L. Gandhi, asked me to, would I summarise, please, the whole conference proceeding? And which I'd done way back in 1995 when I'd gone to a conference in Ladnan. And it was on the strength of that they asked me to do this again. And instead of just producing a boring old document, I got this kind of vision. I was sitting in meditation asking Spirit, how on earth can I summarise hundreds of these learned debates and discussions and things? And I got this idea, well, it obviously has to be a flower, the flower of peace. And you have to envision all the different spheres where that peace energy is needed in life, as if it were written on different petals, going around the central bit of the flower. So the 9 petals of peace it became, which then was produced visually as a poster by a friend of mine when I came back to England. And so the areas include healing, which is to do with physical peace, bodily peace, not being ill. We talk about disease, is when you're not at peace. Politics. A lot of unpeace is caused by politicians. If you think about it, most wars are caused by politicians. Philosophy, again, because some rival schools of philosophers like to attack each other and prove they're right and the other guys are wrong, which is, from a metaphysical perspective, I think is the total error, because everybody sees things from a particular angle. The Jain philosophy, by the way, is a thing called Anikantvada, for those of you that don't know, which means the many-sidedness of reality. Anikantvada is a Jain doctrine that on the path to enlightenment, everyone will have their own perspective and their own formula on how to reach it and even what it'll be like. And on ultimate questions like the nature of God, the gods, the goddess, the eternity of the soul, life after death, these fundamental big questions, it's fine to have many, many different views, because it's like one diamond cut with many facets. And if you are integral in your own view and you're truthful to your experiences, then that is true. You know, if you've had out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, that's your truth, then that's your truth. Live it. If you haven't, and you say like Eileen, she didn't believe in that stuff, she was true to her truth. You know, in the Jain position of Anakantvada, they're both valid. And only when we all reach final ultimate enlightenment can we put all the pieces together. So then we have in the same, there's a petal for education. Again, so much education is violent, is competitive, is stress-causing. I mean, I keep picking up the paper and I read that a kid's committed suicide because their exam results are bad, or because they're being bullied at school, you know. There's a lot of, I mean, I know as a teacher, a lot of burned out kids suffering because of the competitiveness of the school system. It's not right, you know. What I've called for here is peace in the schools. Also teachers, it's quite stressful being a teacher, as I know, and I think Eileen knew. Okay, then we have in science and ecology, again, not using scientific knowledge for violence, for militarism, for you know, dreaming up the next kind of weapons that can zap people, you know, across the solar system. And then also in the world of work, business and economics, again, you know, there's a sort of summary of how we can get peace in that sphere. Then in the media, which is hugely important in contributing, I think, to the oversimplification of reality. I think the Jain position is that reality is extremely complex, and that's good. The media is always painting things in black and white. You know, Saddam is, from being an ally, suddenly absolutely evil. Take him down, you know. I mean, it's just bizarre. Bin Laden, one time Bin Laden was an ally, and a chum of the CIA. Next minute, he's, you know, the devil incarnate. So oversimplification in the media is a problem. And I think even, you know, maybe Jeremy Paxman, that's partly why he got annoyed with the BBC in the end, because he felt that it was oversimplified. Then we've got peace in the family and in gender relations. That's a big one, you know. It is men that do cause a lot of the violence on the planet. Why? How can we get peace there? And then in religion, and you know, you talked about peace between Christianity and Islam. You know, that would come into that petal. So in each of these things, I tried to summarise in a paragraph. What was the sense of this big meeting in Jaipur? They loved it. It was changed a bit. A couple of things have been changed. You know, other people had other things they inputted. So this isn't the final version. There was a new version. Haven't yet made the poster of the final one. Sorry about that. And in the very middle, there's a thing about peace and non-violence, you know, applied to the military and you know, ahimsa in its core essence, if you want. The Jains influenced Gandhi, we should remember. Anyway, that was the product, and it's now being published. They're finally, what is it, January the following year, we're doing the book of papers, and this poster and I wrote a book of footnotes, which is about 100 pages long. The declaration is very short. It takes about 5 pages of A4, or it's the petal thing. But then the footnotes are 100 pages, because I went into real detail as to why the wording is such. And that was published earlier in the year. So that was Jaipur. And it was amazing to meet these people. There was a guy there, for instance, called Bernie Mayer, who's called the American Gandhi, who was a Catholic priest in the 60s, who was involved with the kind of anti-nuclear protests. He was marching with Martin Luther King, and he's been arrested some 100 times for protesting the American nuclear weapons program, which is up near Seattle. It's the equivalent of our Faslane, is an American one, and they regularly go there and protest. Amazing chap, and lots of others of that kind of calibre. So then I came back to Britain, and I took part in a conference in London, organised by Vijay Mehta, who's a mutual friend of some people. I did invite him today, but obviously he's busy. And this was about Syria specifically. This was a conference about how we can get peace in Syria. And there was a panel of speakers, about 10 of us, talking about... And these were journalists. There was a guy called Tim Llewellyn, who'd been a BBC journalist in the Middle East for many years. A chap called Dilip Hero, who's a historian of the Middle East. And there was a very interesting journalist from the Lebanon who'd come over especially for the conference, who'd interviewed a lot of the Middle Eastern leaders over the last 20 years, including Saddam Hussein and all the different heads of state. And she spoke very eloquently. I only discovered a week later she's the mother of the woman that George Clooney was engaged to and then married. That was just something I discovered. So that woman comes from a good stock, so to say, of activists and very intelligent, peace-committed people. So I'm hoping George Clooney is going to pick up the bug and become a sort of campaigner for peace. Watch this space. He'd be good for it. Yeah, I'm sure he does a lot. Yeah. Well, and she's also been campaigning for the return of the Elgin marbles. That was one of the cases that she's got involved with. But anyway, so that day on Syria was really interesting. And my talk was about, again, my attempt to get the British Foreign Office to take on board the notion of a peace policy. And I described some of my contacts. Now, I wrote to the Foreign Minister when it was William Hague, had a few exchanges, suggested that we have a multi-faith mediation in a neutral venue outside Syria, because Syria is imploding because of religious differences. The Alawites that run the country are a particular brand of Shiism, very esoteric tradition. They're very interesting, actually. They believe in reincarnation. They have an ancient interpretation of the Quran that predates Islam. They're sort of a Gnostic group. Then you've got Druze, you've got Shia Muslims, you've got Sufis, you've got Sunnis, you've got different kinds of Christians, you've got Orthodox, you've got some Catholic. You did have a substantial Jewish population, but they seem to have all gone to Israel, although there may be a few left. And you've got Baha'is, and you've got quite a lot of secular Arab people. I mean, Syria is quite a highly intellectual country. So what I've suggested to the Foreign Office is to invite representatives of all of them to a neutral venue and facilitate their dialogue, their discussions, and get an agreed peace plan. Basically they've got to agree to respect each other and then have some kind of constitution. Like in Ireland, there's a formula that was used in Ireland, which is invented by a social scientist to give representation to different cultural and religious identities. And that could be applied in Syria. It's a thing called I can't pronounce it. It's a technical term that's been invented for problems in societies when you've got ethnic and religious conflict. And it's solved the Northern Ireland problem, fingers crossed. Okay, so the Foreign Office wrote back, it's a very good idea, but blah, 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 no, we can't do it. But, keep talking to us. Eventually, I managed to get somebody who said, yeah, we think this is a good idea. Please come down to Westminster and talk about this. And we'll have a session and see where we can go with this. But please ring this chap, and then we'll arrange a visit. Anyway, so I rang this chap, and I spoke to him at some length, about an hour. But basically, it was the complete opposite of what was said in the letter. In the letter it said, come to London, we'll organise a mediation preparatory meeting. When I spoke to the bloke, it was, who the hell are you, go away. And not only that, it was, no, we don't want, actually, to mediate between all the people in Syria. What we want is to help the rebels bring down Assad. And we are working with particular groups of rebels, with training and all kinds of support, to bring down that regime. And I said, well, hang on a minute. When was that discussed in Parliament? When was that approved as foreign policy for this country? When did we as British people agree that was a jolly good thing? Because isn't that against international law to work to subvert a sovereign government? No answer to that one. And I then issued a warning. I said, look, are you aware of the fact that the very people you're supporting and training, there's a very fine gradation into an extremist element, Al-Qaeda types, extremists who actually just the other week killed a soldier in South London, and it was the same time that thing happened. So I said, and we're also, by the way, we're still fighting them in Afghanistan. They're blowing up our troops every other day. How can you be telling me that we're supporting them in Syria, and yet exactly the same people are trying to kill us in the streets of London and in Afghanistan and everything? Has anyone thought this through? Where's the joined up thinking here? And I said, it's very dangerous what you're doing. If you're frankly telling me that British foreign policy is to support extremist Sunni rebels to take down Assad, then it's going to come back on us. And I would really like the chance to come down and talk you out of that one. Anyway, then, so the line went dead, as it were. We agreed to differ. And now, of course, this is exactly what's happened, because by giving that kind of green light on the part of the Foreign Office and the British government to supporting those extremist Sunnis, ordinary Sunni Muslims in Bradford and Cardiff and Birmingham have thought, as it were, it's fine to go off and do jihad against Assad. And actually, that's what the government wants, secretly. So that's what's been going on. All these people have been going off. And of course, then it's turned nasty because we've got ISIS or ISIL. That's the mask has come off those extremists. And now suddenly the Foreign Office doesn't know what to do. So now it's saying, well, they can't come back in the country. And they're looking at the problem, how to de-radicalise. But they've created the problem in the beginning. If they'd have listened to me, 2 years ago when I had that conversation, and we devised a mediation between the Shias, the Sunnis, and the Alawites and all the rest, we wouldn't be in the situation where we are now. I'm beginning to feel like Cassandra. Every time I suggest something, it's completely ignored and then it gets worse. So anyway, this is what I said in the conference in Syria, and that was filmed. You can see the whole detail of that. It was a very useful and interesting day, but nothing came of it. The Syria crisis is still unresolved. The latest update is I had a contact from the Foreign Office trying to finally say maybe we ought to do what you've been saying for the last 3 years. So I'm going to keep going with that. And I've written a book about the need for a peace policy in Syria. So if you're interested in the details, look that up. The next thing I did after that was I went off to Cordoba in Spain, invited to go and do a talk at a conference on Muslim, Jewish, Christian unity in Cordoba in southern Spain. No, go for it. Dash. I don't know if any of you have been to Cordoba in southern Spain, in Andalusia. Yeah. Okay, it was the cradle of a very magical time in world civilization, when Jewish, Christian and Muslim cultures came together under an Islamic umbrella, and it housed the caliphate, briefly, for a few hundred years, of Umayyads who'd fled from Baghdad, and they brought with them an incredibly high level of Islamic theology and science. And at that time, in about the 8th, 9th centuries AD, there were more bookshops, more libraries, and more manuscripts circulating in Cordoba than anywhere in Western Europe. It was on a level of sophistication that was unheard of in the rest of Europe. And they were translating texts from Greek into Arabic. So they had the whole of Aristotle, they had Plato, they had all the Greek geographers and scientists and mathematicians. And they were then translating them into Arabic and then working on improving them. So Ibn Rushd, the great Islamic commentator on Aristotle, not only studied and read and translated and understood Aristotle, but then he commented on the complete corpus of Aristotle and pointed out where Aristotle got it wrong, and and also how faith and reason can be reconciled. But it has to be with autonomy given to reason as much as to faith. So whereas the discourse of the ISIL types is that there is no reconciliation between faith and reason. There is only faith. And anybody that says anything else should be killed. That reason has gone out of fashion. So what Cordoba stands for is that moment in Islam when philosophy, spirituality and theology were equal. It also produced Ibn Arabi. You talked about Sufism earlier, Wendy. Ibn Arabi is known as the Sheikh of Sheikhs. He was one of the most important Sufis of all time. He came from Cordoba. And the people that hosted this conference were a Sufi group who have a centre for the study of the three religions in Cordoba, and there's a museum dedicated to this. And Maimonides came from Cordoba as well, the greatest Jewish philosopher of rational Judaism, who reconciled Aristotle, the Bible, and philosophy. The greatest philosopher of Judaism. It was awesome to be there. And it was also co-organised by Dartington, the Schumacher College, which has a philosophy section run by a guy called Philip Francis. And they publish a journal called Holistic Science, which is really amazing. And they're doing amazing work about science and spirituality. Philip Francis himself is a scientist, and it was co-sponsored, hosted over there by a centre, as well as the Sufi centre, a chap called Shantena, who runs like a retreat centre near Cordoba. He's an amazing guy. His mother was Roman Catholic Italian. His father was Jewish. He was born in 1942 in World War II. And he had to be smuggled into Switzerland because the Nazis were rounding up all the Jewish kids to kill them. He grew up in Italy, in Milan, and did a PhD in nuclear physics. He's a nuclear physicist, this guy. Trained on how you study black holes. But then he got involved with the Jungian search for consciousness in relation to physics. And the head of the Jungian Institute in Zurich told him to learn Chinese and do a translation of the Tao Te Ching, which he did. And now he's running this sort of mystical science centre outside Cordoba. It was like something out of a novel. A bit like the castle, only a lot warmer and with an outdoor swimming pool. So that was amazing. And yeah, it was like revisiting, because I'd been to Cordoba way back in 1991 to a UNESCO symposium. I thought we'd be much further along the path by 2014. I gave a paper way back then at UNESCO about Ibn Arabi, Raymond Lull, and the Zohar, Jewish mysticism. These esoteric systems are already at peace. That inner peace is already declared between them. Why is it these exoteric people are still ruining the planet? This is what sort of we were discussing in Cordoba. Then I came back to Britain and I chaired a meeting. Somebody was supposed to be coming from it, but they said they might be late. You never know. Still might turn up. At Stonehenge, because I'm chair of a thing called the Stonehenge Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is in my Druid hat. Now, I got involved with the Druid community because I support the need for indigenous spirituality wherever. If I was in Australia, I'd be working with the Australian Aborigines or the Maoris or whatever. The voice of primal people throughout the planet is a very important voice. We should hear it. The American Indian voice against fracking. And, these are the people who are wedded to the land. They speak with the authority of the land. And I didn't know there were any Druids left until about 15 years ago. I met them. I was invited to the Council of Druid Orders. And I went to Ireland. I met Druids in Ireland. We did ceremonies at Tara. In Wales, I met quite a lot of Druids. And, they've been going for a few hundred years, revived. But I think, have definite roots going back to, the original medieval and pre-medieval, actually pre-Roman traditions. So, anyway, I chaired this meeting because I think the politics of access to Stonehenge is ridiculous. We the people can't go into Stonehenge without paying loads of money. We can't even go up to and mingle amongst the stones. So you get this ridiculous walkie-talkie and walk around the edge. They've just spent, I think it's £600 million on a new visitor centre, but that's miles away from the actual stones. Because of the work of this Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other similar bodies, we made it that we could get access at the solstice and equinoxes. But that is so controlled and policed that it's a joke. You're not allowed to take in, a ground sheet to sit on. You can't take a sleeping bag, even though it's sub-zero temperatures in winter and stuff. You can't take a little shelter, let alone a tent. You're not allowed any. I couldn't be doing this. There's such a ridiculous kind of preciousness about controlling the space, which goes back to the Battle of the Beanfield and the clash between alternative culture in this country and Thatcher's officialdom. So it's a kind of mediation case I took on. The last Truth and Reconciliation Commission meeting was very good. We heard from a number of people. The policeman in charge of the Stonehenge area came. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done on creating access for genuine spiritual pilgrims. From a Druid or pagan perspective, what goes on at Stonehenge is as if, somebody had taken control of St Paul's Cathedral and wasn't allowing Christians in unless they paid 10 quid, but then they could only walk around the outside. It's completely ridiculous. To give an example, some friends of mine, a Druid couple, wanted to get married at Stonehenge, and they wanted me to book it, and get somebody to do the ceremonies. So I investigated it, and they wanted 30 guests. 30 guests each have to pay £30 each, right? That's £900 cost. And for that you get 1 hour in the stones. So that's 900 quid an hour that English Heritage are making from that site. Something not right there. I bet the Quakers don't charge that much if you want to get married here. It's completely ridiculous. And I think those pagans, those Druids, should be allowed to go in and use it for religious rituals for free. Or a token payment, £1 each or something. Well, it's a rip-off. No, they've dropped out. They're going to do it at Avebury, which is free. But it's just a symbolic. It really annoys me that the secular government and the state, in the form of English Heritage, control and police what is the pagan sacred sanctuary. And it symbolises all that's wrong with our planet. The people of spirit can't get into the temple, And I'll keep at that one. So I keep persevering with that. And again, you can read the minutes of the meeting. It's a public meeting. It's a service thing. And I'll be doing another one next year or this year. And I'll be inviting, people. Again, it's about policy. It's a lack of thinking this through. Of course, the system doesn't want punch-ups in the bean fields again. We don't want, to go back to that confrontational clash between alternative culture and establishment culture. But if we don't want that, we have to be clever and listen to both sides. The alternative culture has a right to access its sanctuaries. That's what I'm saying as chair of that group. And if you go on suppressing and repressing that voice, then you will get trouble. Then I went off to Turkey. Now, I'd never been to Turkey before, in August. This was for the International Peace Research Association, which is the biggest international body of peace researchers on the planet, which I first got involved with years ago in the University of Sussex in 1988. They met. They've been going since the 60s, 65. And if anyone's seriously into peace research and peace studies, they're the body to join and network with. They have about 25 different commissions. So they do peace in the arts, peace in music, peace in drama, peace in sociology, peace in gender studies, peace in militarism and disarmament. peace and human rights, peace and the environment. You know, it's a very, very broad coalition. And about 3,000 academics came to Turkey, some of whom I'd already met years ago. People like Johan Galton spoke. You know, it was the 50th anniversary of IPRA. So there was quite a big showcase of the old generation. But it was a bit of a handing on the torch to the new. And there were some really brilliant young minds from all over the place. I was incredibly moved by, for example, you see, I was in the Peace Theories Commission, which is the kind of peace philosophy. Since I coordinate philosophers of peace, that's where I go. But I used to go out and spy on the other commissions. And I was incredibly moved going to the art one, because there was a thing called Acting Together on the World Stage, which is a group of theatre performers around the planet have come together to use drama as a conflict resolution tool in situations of extreme conflict. These are consummate performers and actors, basically doing street drama in Peru about issues about the disappearances and stuff, in Belgrade about issues about, you know, what happened in Kosovo and Srebrenica and so on. And so there was a documentary made highlighting about 20 different theatre professional groups around the planet using theatre in situations of conflict. Also in Africa, a guy has written a play about gender abuse in Africa. Apparently, you know, sexual violence is very, very prevalent in South Africa. You know, young girls get raped, and it's just not. Nobody talks about it. It's hushed up. It's brushed under the carpet. So this guy wrote a play about it, and it suddenly was talked about. He brought it to the attention of South African consciousness and got a lot of stick for it. And so the documentary interviews these people, as they explain. There was a guy in Black America, in the Deep South, again, talking about the importance of storytelling. Theatre is about telling the stories of you know, the repressed voices of mankind. It was just so moving. And at the end of it, you know, we all gave feedback. And I got up and did an impromptu poem, because I'm a poet as well as a bard. And, you know, it affects you at that depth, this kind of work. So Turkey was absolutely awesome. And being there, going to the Hagia Sophia church. I'd never been to Istanbul. Has anyone here been to Istanbul? Okay. Well, I haven't. And it's awesome. It's amazing, because it's the cusp of Europe and Asia. And, you know, so much blood has been spilled there, and so much clashing of civilizations that it's time to make peace there. And I was actually really favourably struck by the young Turkish people I met, and their intellectual brilliance. The woman who was elected coordinator of European Peace Research Association, which is the regional body. IPRA's got like African Association, Asian, and we've got a European Peace Research Association. She's a Turk, who I met, Itir Tokosh, highly intelligent young woman teaching international relations in Istanbul. And they're having a conference in Finland next year. So anyway, it was awesome. And I can share more if anyone's interested. Then, out of the blue, right, I was invited back to India. I'd already been to Jaipur. But suddenly they asked me to go and speak at another conference in Delhi this time. And it was another group of Jains. Obviously they'd heard of my work through the first thing, and because of writing this and everything, I suppose they'd heard of me. And it was an anniversary, the 100th anniversary of the birth of a guy called Acharya Tulsi. Now, Acharya Tulsi he was like one of the living saints on the planet, like the Dalai Lama or something. He's as important to the Jains as the Dalai Lama is to the Buddhists. And he was born 100 years ago, and he became a Jain monk at a very early age, in his 20s. And he influenced loads of people. He met all the presidents and prime ministers of India. He met. He used to walk into the Punjab area where there was conflict, because Jains walk. If you're a Jain monk, not a layperson. Layperson can take the train or the bus, but the Jain monks walk barefoot because they don't want to damage the environment. And the really top Jain monks, they clock up like 10,000 miles, 20,000 miles, 30,000 miles. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And they go on walkabout every few years. And from village to village with a bunch of maybe 100 monks and nuns. And it's an amazing thing to see. So I joined a few of those walks over the years. And Acharya Tulsi I met back in 95 when I first went there. And it was a very interesting conference where I met him, and I wrote about it. And so they invited me back, and I gave a talk. And I think, again, the highlights of these things, what makes them so valuable is the people you meet, and the lasting impression they make, really. But whilst I was there, I thought, well, I'm going to stay in India and not just fly back. I don't want to be one of these people that just goes to conferences. It's ridiculous. It's not good for the carbon footprint. And this might be the last time I ever get to India. So I want to go and see all the places I haven't been to yet. So I worked out an itinerary. I'd never yet been to the Ganges. I'd been to Rajasthan and the south, but I'd always wanted to go to the Ganges, right? And see where Buddha came from, and Varanasi. And I worked out that I could. So what I did is I went to, from Delhi, I went to Jaipur. I gave a talk at the University of Rajasthan. And I took part in a conference in Delhi on the contributions of the Jains to science and mathematics. This is a very high-level conference of scientists and mathematicians. The Jains invented the concept, it would appear, of infinity. Only they have 6 different types of infinity in their mathematics. And there were papers about this stuff, which were very interesting. And then I got on a train, and that's not as easy as it sounds, by the way, in India, because you need the tickets, the reservations, who do you talk to get the tickets and the reservations, and. But eventually I got on a train to Varanasi, or Kashi, the city of light, which is Shiva's city. And it is an extraordinary place, and I recommend everybody should go there at some point in their lives. Have you been? You're nodding. And the gaps along the river where they burn the bodies. You've been, Diane? Okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting place. I mean, I got there onto the riverbank at dusk and saw these fires and burning bodies. And the wood's all piled neatly up. It's a profession for the people that do it. There's a mindfulness about death and the reincarnation cycle, I think, is what you can say there. But whilst I was there, I made the effort also to go to Sarnath, which is not far from Varanasi, which is where Buddha gave his first public sermon. It's called The Turning of the Wheel of the Law. And a number of people here said they're interested in Buddhism. I've always been interested in Buddhism. I took Buddhist initiation when I was 18, 19. So I'm, as well as everything else, I'm also a Buddhist. And I wanted to go there. And it's amazing. Sarnath. Has anyone been? Okay. Yeah, those great big, the stupas. And when I was there, there were about 2,000 visitors from Sri Lanka come up on a pilgrimage, and they had this huge, silk scroll that had writing on it in Sri Lanka, and they were walking, and they took it all the way around the base of the stupa and were doing prayers and things. It was like a living place, not just a dead place. And everywhere there were little clusters of people in different robes talking to students and things. So that was very moving to go there. And then I went on to Patna, further along the Ganges, which in those days, in Buddha's day, was called Pataliputra. And it was the capital city of that whole Ganges area. And I went to the main museum there, and it's an extraordinary, it's in Bihar. And it's an extraordinary sense of ancientness about it, really. And in its day, it was a very, very important city. And just from there, I went to a place called Nalanda, which I'd always wanted to go to. Has anyone been there? Nalanda? Okay. That's a bit further out, and it's an archaeological site, and it was the greatest Buddhist monastery ever in the history of Buddhism. There was something like 10,000 monks there, and they had incredible researchers and libraries, and it was like the Oxford University of Buddhism for many centuries. And basically, I went to the museum there, and I pieced everything together. It was where Tantric Buddhism came from, Nalanda. And unfortunately, when the Muslims conquered northern India, they destroyed the monastery, killed the monks, and burned the library. And I learned that the library burned for 6 months. You could see the smoke rising from the ruins for 6 months as all those manuscripts went up in smoke. So I'm standing there with my hair, going up on end, weeping mentally for this. But the good news is, that's where Padmasambhava and Tilopa and Naropa and all the great Buddhist Tibetan Tantric initiates brought Tantric Buddhism into Tibet from. This is what I worked out. So Tibetan Buddhism got all the manuscripts from Nalanda. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. And all the kind of, going around, looking at the iconography, because archaeologists have dug up all the sculptures that were left scattered in the fields. They're all Tibetan Buddhists. Tara comes up again and again and again. All the stuff you think of as Tibetan Buddhism is actually Nalanda. And also Indra. I discovered Indra is the secret god behind Buddha. And that's what the dorje is. The dorje is the symbol of Indra. Indra throws the lightning bolts. And that shows that Buddha comes from a very ancient strand of Hinduism, because they were still worshipping Indra, which is Vedic. Long, long before they all got into, Vishnu and all that new stuff. Commercial razzmatazz. They're doing the Indra stuff, which is really ancient. So I learned a lot about where Buddha actually came from, and Buddhism, and it was that kind of diamond core of enlightenment, will to enlightenment. And anyway, so bad news is the monastery was burned. Good news is it went to Tibet. Bad news is the Chinese then burned that. But good news is it came to Samiling and it got out and it got to Dharamsala. So life is a constant, game of good and bad news. Anyway, then I went on to Calcutta, which, I'd always wanted to go to. And I know, Di, you'd been to Calcutta, and you were there with Mother Teresa and all that, and you used to inspire me. I'll go someday. Anyway, I finally got there, okay? And I thought it was going to be the slummiest and most horrible of all Indian cities, because you read in the press, that's the image you get. But actually, it's the total opposite. I found it the most civilized and most presentable in an architectural sense, because the British used it as their capital for many, many centuries. And, you can walk around Calcutta and you can feel like you're in, Mayfair or something. But I went to the Royal Asiatic Society, which was founded by Sir William Jones, who's one of my intellectual heroes, who invented Indo-European linguistics, who was a Welshman and a Druid and a judge, and a multilinguist from the University of Oxford, who discovered that Sanskrit and Welsh and Greek and Latin all come from the same language family. Sort of, aha! He was the first Westerner to make the effort to learn Sanskrit deeply with a trained background in languages. And he founded this thing called the Royal Asiatic Society, which is still going. They dropped the Royal. But they had an art exhibition when I was there. And they have a huge library. So, okay. It was an awesome trip. Then I came back to Britain, and then I went to a thing called the Conflict Research Society meeting. Now, the Conflict Research Society is like Britain's IPRA. I talked about the International Peace Research Association. It's kind of big, disciplinary forum for advanced peace scholarship. There's this thing in the United Kingdom called the Conflict Research Society, which was founded by Cedric Smith, who was a colleague of mine when I was setting up my Peace Institute at London. He was a mathematical geneticist at University College. And these people are serious social scientists. And there was a guy there called Chris Mitchell, who was from George Mason University, who worked with the leading thinkers behind peace and conflict studies in Britain and the West, you could say. And there's some brilliant papers. It was a very academic forum. But that body, if anyone's into peace research, seriously, join the Conflict Research Society and go along to their meetings. It was very inspirational. and I mean, one person in particular struck me was a young German student, only in her, I guess, mid-20s. She's already done her first degree in international political science at Munich. She then did a master's in Tel Aviv University in Israel and learned Hebrew. She's now learning Iranian and has spent time in Tehran. And she's about to do a PhD comparing political rhetoric for war or peace in the Israeli and the Iranian media, contrasting this sort of belligerence that comes across in their publications. The Iranians hate the Israelis hate the Iranians. So she's studying the two, having lived and worked in the culture, and she's only in her mid-20s. So there were people of that calibre there. And it was just nice to, be back. And also the train taking me there passed through Skipton, which is where Eileen went to school. So it was nice to be back in Yorkshire. There is a land north of Watford, and they are quite clever up there. So then, totally out of the blue, I keep thinking I'll get back to the castle and do some writing now, But then I got another invite to go back to Turkey. Completely out of the blue, I got a letter saying, "Dear Dr. Daffern, we've been following your career with interest. We'd like to invite you to a conference organised by the Great Universal Brotherhood of Sufis. And, we're issuing a call to universal peace from Universal Brotherhood. We'd like you to be one of the panel." And I looked at it, I thought, is this a spoof? Looked it up on the web. No, it was genuine. And so I went back to Istanbul, and it was a very, very moving experience. There were about 3,000 people in a huge auditorium in one of the biggest conference centres in Istanbul. And it's the thing they do every November the 1st, this particular branch of Sufis. And the founder of it is a woman called Bülent Çolak, who is a secular Muslim in the tradition of Kemal Ataturk. They believe that Kemal Ataturk was trying to do something new and important by blending Western thought with Islamic thought. And they think Turkey should remain a secular, progressive republic, wedded to the idea of it is possible to have an intelligent, secular and progressive kind of Islam. And it's about 1 million miles away from the ISIS types that chop your head off if you even mention philosophy. So it felt like being home among the brotherhood and sisterhood. A lot of it, and it was a very moving experience. And whilst I was there, I thought, again, I'm not just going to go there and fly back. I'm going to explore a bit. So I took the opportunity to explore parts of Turkey I'd never done before. Ever since a boy, when Eileen used to read to us the tales of Troy and, Homer and all that, I've always wanted to go to Troy. And so I finally made it to Troy. You get a bus and you work out, and it's not expensive, and you can stay in cheap hostels and things. And I actually walked on the ruins that Schliemann found. I saw the Schliemann Trench. I discovered that the whole site has been thoroughly researched by a man called Dr. Manfred Kortfield, who was from the University of Tübingen, who for 20 years did a micro-analysis of the site of Troy, and has proved beyond a shadow of doubt that that is the actual site, because in some people's mind, maybe Schliemann got it wrong. No, it is there. And he's analysed in great detail the exact strata. There's Troy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and which is the bit that Homer was writing about. There may be some discussion about that. But it's the site. So it was extremely moving to be there. And I had this vision come to me. I'll share it because I'm among friends. I had this thought, crazy thought. You know, what if we had a peace conference at Troy and we had representatives of all the Asian countries and religions and all the European countries and religions come and have a peace conference and promise not to attack each other anymore? I just thought that would be so sort of deep, you know, because I think a lot of the wars we're still fighting go back to the Trojan War. That was the archetypal attack by Europe on Asia. And then Asia attacked back by Iran attacking Greece, you know, Xerxes and all that. Then Alexander attacked back in revenge for that one. And it's been going back and forth. And I discovered that the Gallipoli landings, when the West again tried to attack Turkey, are within sight of the mound of Troy. Troy is, the geography of it's extraordinary. It's on a raised plateau, about as high as the South Downs even. And you look down towards the sea as if looking to the Weald. And just across there is Gallipoli. And so it guards exactly where the Aegean Sea goes into the little narrow strip called the Hellespont, which is where Byron swam across, which takes you up through to Istanbul and then the Black Sea. So it's exactly on the cusp of Europe and Asia. And I just thought, what a symbolic place to have a peace conference, you know. Then I went to Ephesus, which again I'd always wanted to go to. Ephesus. And I discovered several things about that. The Temple of Diana isn't there anymore. I thought I'd pay my respects. Great Temple of Diana. It's been pulled down, and they used some of the columns to build Hagia Sophia with, which is typical. But what is remaining is an extraordinary city. Has anyone been to Ephesus? Yeah. Okay. You agree, it's amazing, isn't it? There's a huge library, there's an enormous theatre, there's streets, there's houses. It's a bit like, you know, it's the lanes. You could be in the lanes, only they're slightly bigger, the streets. And it's like you can walk amongst the streets and you can know what it must have been feeling like to live there. And of course that's where St. Paul was, and he wrote the famous letter to the Ephesians there, or to the community in Ephesus. And intellectually it was a very important place. And it's one of the birthplaces of philosophy. And the reason I wanted to go is because I'm a fan of Heraclitus, who came from Ephesus. And I discovered something very interesting. It was Heraclitus who said that in the beginning is the Logos. The Logos is a fire, which is an energy that's constantly moving. So you can't step into the same bit of it twice. It's always moving on. Whitehead calls it process philosophy. But I discovered something else interesting, because St. John the Divine, who wrote his Gospel saying in the beginning was the Logos, which is what the Greek says, right? He went to Ephesus. And I think he did that because he was trying to say to the cosmos, I'm with Heraclitus. My Christianity is a fire based on the Word, the living Word. And I discovered that St. John is actually buried in the little village outside Ephesus called Seljuk, where I bought a carpet. Yeah, do you want to go? And also, not only that, there's another interesting story about Ephesus, because the legend said, in the ancient church, there was a legend that the mother of Christ, the Virgin Mary, also went to Ephesus in her old age and was taken there by St. John and looked after. But that kind of, nobody knew where that was physically, right? In the 19th century, a German nun called Catherine Emmerich had some strange visions. She had these like Jungian type episodes where she was having visions. And it was there was a little hut shown to her as the place the Virgin Mary retired to. And she told this to her priests and her confessors and all that. And they got the bishop in, they got all the inquisitors in, and the Jesuits, and they investigated it, and they thought, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe she's not crazy. And a bunch of German pilgrims who got instructions from Catherine Emmerich went to Ephesus and followed her instructions, and she described exactly where this place was. And they found it. exactly as she described in her visions. You know, it was all covered in ivy and fallen down. But it was there. It's on the mountain outside Ephesus. And so it's now a pilgrim shrine. It's called the House of Mary. And the church actually believes this is the place where Virgin Mary ended up. You know, looked after by John. And I didn't have time to go to it, but I just thought that was interesting. And then I went to Miletus, which is another great ancient city, birthplace of philosophy, where many great, you know, Thales came from, the first philosopher, really. These are pre-Socratics. And it was in Brighton I first got into studying philosophy. I did ancient Greek history and fell in love with all these people and thought, why don't they teach you this at school? These are so much more interesting than physics. Anyway, Thales, I had to pay my respect. And there I discovered something really interesting, going around the museum, that Miletus was a Cretan colony. Way, way before it was anything else. The Cretans from Knossos had set up Miletus. And I love Crete, and as you know, my mother was a kind of reborn Cretan priestess, in my opinion. She used to go to Crete every year. And some of her ashes will probably end up there at some point. And the Cretan civilization was on a very sophisticated level. You know, it was peace-loving, it was goddess-friendly, it was wise, I think, very, very long time ago. And I think it's interesting that Miletus, the birthplace of philosophy, was a Cretan colony. There was a link there. They proved it because the very earliest strata in the archaeological digs at Miletus are Cretan, you know. And, of course, then I had to go and pay my respects to Apollo, because Miletus has this thing called the Sacred Walkway, which goes to a place called Didyma, which was the second most important prophetic temple in the ancient world after Delphi. Apollo was the lord of prophecy. And Didyma is an extraordinary ruined temple, huge, with these vast columns, you know. And in there the priest or priestess would receive inspiration and, you know, answer questions. I think there's something to be said for oracles, and I think they should be brought back, you know. Nobody should have a monopoly of prophecy anymore. I think we've all got the right to access it. And it'd be nice if we could have all these sacred temples back. That's my position. And that's why I think Stonehenge, which was a prophetic centre, and its equivalents in Britain, should be revived, you know. And that would end the metaphysical hunger that I think is at the root of these religious wars. These religious wars are caused by a shortage, a scarcity thing. You know, God is so thin on the ground that we have to fight over the last few scraps we've got. Whereas my view of God is totally different. It's omnipresent, you know, omnibeloving, and totally never gone away, you know, and comes in a million varieties. And so let's reopen temples like Didyma, is what I say. Anyway, so that's my little trip. And I think that was quite an amazing year. And I just, to conclude, yes, I think I've been invited back to India again on the 5th of January. I'm you know, third now. This is why I'm flying back to Scotland tomorrow and then off again to India. This time I'm going back to the south, to Bangalore. And I'm going to be talking with a group of Hindu-based spiritual elders this time, which is interesting, instead of Jain. And it's one thing that I thought about deeply when I was in India last time was whatever happened to Ramanuja. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Ramanuja, any of you. He was the other great theologian of Hindu philosophy. There was Shankara, who's the founder of Absolute Advaita Vedanta, which everybody's heard of, which says that we all blend into the Absolute, and our soul, the Atman, is at one with the Brahman, and that's what we should all be working on, is blending with the Absolute. But it's quite difficult, and also it sort of negates the relative. Because if you're on that let's blend with the Absolute trip, you're probably not going to go to a party this evening. You know, you're not going to be playing with the relative. And indeed, why would the relative want to come into existence? So there's another philosopher came along called Ramanuja, who invented or developed a thing called modified absolutism. And he said that, yes, it's true we're all the absolute, but we like to play at not being so that we can have a world. And that's fine too. And it's the gap between the self and the beloved that makes the world possible in the form that it is. And without that, there can be no love, there can be no worship. So, and I was thinking, you see, the theists who believe in God as an absolute other, and then the kind of secularists that want to totally get rid of that whole thing and abolish God. I was thinking when I was in India, surely Ramanuja ought to say something here. You know, it's about keeping the conversation sustainable for peace between the absolute and the relative. Anyway, blow me down. I got back to England, to Scotland, and I got an invite from the Ramanuja Hindu Peace Organisation through the International Peace Bureau. I'm going as a consultant for the International Peace Bureau to basically represent them and see what they're doing. You know, again, they're coming from the inner peace, but they're also doing a lot of work on outer peace issues. And you know, I have also talked when I was in India, when I'm talking about peace policy studies. I've talked about the fact of India's nuclear weapons and Pakistan and the need for... let me just finish. The conclusion I want to talk about is also this has been the year of the Scottish referendum, and I was living through it. And I thought very deeply about it because a lot of my good friends took the Scottish nationalist position and thought that because, you know, the SNP will get rid of nuclear weapons, that ethically you have to vote them in. And if it means breaking up the United Kingdom, okay, it's got to be done. I thought about this a lot, and I'm prepared to give the United Kingdom a few more years, right? But I think it's under notice that we have to seriously take peace seriously in this country as a whole, including in England, or the Scots will break away, you know, and it'll be done whether you like it or not, right? So my kind of, and I've written to Cameron and various other people saying basically, you have to seriously do some peace policy thinking here, or you're not gonna have a choice, right? If you love the United Kingdom enough to keep it together, the cost has to be that we have to get serious about peace. And I'm prepared, you know, I love the United Kingdom, but I also love peace. I'd like to be able to love them both. But, you know, we can't wait forever, I think. So, a bit like Ramanuja, I took a modified, non-dualistic nationalist position, which is, let's keep, you know, the country together, but make it pursue a peace policy. And that means that we have to get serious about nuclear disarmament in the fora, such as I hope Ros will tell us about in a minute. And the United Kingdom has to make an announcement that we don't want to invest in a whole new generation of weapons. We want to work diplomatically with our colleagues around the world, like the United States, but also China and Russia and India, Pakistan and Israel. Everyone has to be around the table. And we have to find a way of, you know, seriously getting rid of these ridiculous weapons and investing the money we save into, you know, social expenditure, education, health, scholarship, science, all the things that need doing, you know.
I mean, do you know, are the Scottish people actually against nuclear weapons, or is it they don't want it in their country, part of the country?
No, they're against them in toto.
Is that
yeah.
so?
Yes. Yeah, but no, that is it. Yeah, that is the position. But what I would say is that it should be put to the United Kingdom as a referendum, just as Scottish independence is put as a referendum. I think we should have a referendum on the future of nuclear weapons in this country, and it should be separated out from the Scottish independence issue, which I think should be put to bed for a generation, you know. That was voted on. It's not happening for a generation. But nuclear weapons issue, I think, is something that should be, you know.
There's a lot more debate between the referendum because we're so coming down on it and there's so much misinformation.
Well, let that, you know, that's our job, isn't it, to get that debate going and get the information out.
There's the opportunity.
Okay. So that's my conclusion really, is that I'm going to continue doing this work. I'm doing it on behalf of my institute. I'm doing it on behalf of everyone really. The institute was supposed to be Britain's National Centre for Peace Research in London. It's in a castle in Scotland at the moment. You know, if they want to offer me a house in Bloomsbury, I'll happily bring it back to London. I could do a lot of work there. I still think we need a National Peace Research Institute in London, actually, and I'd be happy to work with anyone that wants to do that. I did notice that the Institute of Education and University College has merged, and because I worked for the Institute of Education when I started all this work, and University College a bit, so I wrote and said, should we set it up now, finally? So I'm still exploring those options. But, I can't wait for the bureaucrats of education to give a green light. It's too important. One has to get on with the work itself.
I mean, there are so many practical issues, aren't there? That is, about the difference between Islam and Christianity, and that is a very big issue. But, I mean, when you think about, for example, forcing women to get married to men that they don't want to.
You mean the kind of arranged marriage customs?
Yes. I mean, this is so backward, and yet, there are a lot of people who live in Britain who do this.
Okay, well look, I think I'll take that as a question, and I'll throw it open to questions. I'm going to answer slightly controversially on that one, because I know exactly where you're coming from, and I agree that it seems abhorrent. But coming from India, a lot of marriages in India are arranged marriages, even now, among both the Hindu and the Muslim community. And they think it's really odd that we would invest the whole life future of the next generation of the coming together of two families in just a random falling in love experience, which hormonally doesn't normally tend to last. So from their perspective, they think we're weird. And I can see, and most of their marriages last.
It's a commercial arrangement, really. Also, there is, infanticide in India of girls, children.
Thank you.
The whole thing is tied up.
Okay.
This is what I mean about a series of practical issues before one can actually look at the huge differences between Islam and
I'm glad you raised that, because I forgot to raise that. When I was in India, I discovered this, as you say, this female infanticide is still going on. I think it's largely Hindus, actually, that are doing this. I don't think the Muslims of India are doing it. Because Muhammad abolished female infanticide. It's something that Islam is really strict on. But the Hindus are going to the doctor and seeing if they've got a girl child, and if so, they're having it aborted. And it's scandalous. And I spoke at length to a woman lawyer from the Central Court in India about, she wanted to set up an NGO and she wanted advice and stuff. And I said, if you're going to set up an NGO, do it to tackle and raise that issue. Because it's weird. They, on the one hand, deify the goddess, but actual girls and women, they commit infanticide. Also, wife burning. If the wife doesn't bring enough dowry, the mother-in-law, tends to burn her.
Or killing women who refuse to marry people they don't want to.
Yeah.
How cool is that? I mean,
it's not, obviously. So,
I'm not convinced that these are religious issues. I don't think it's a matter of Islam or Hinduism. After all, you've only got to go back, 300 years, and there were arranged marriages in this country, possibly with less pressure, but certainly they were.
Sure, they still are.
I mean, so when I say in this country, amongst if you like, the population that we consider the majority population, it's, well, I know the word, patriarchy is a kind of standard around word, but essentially it does sum up a particular cultural approach, and that cultural approach becomes embedded in some beliefs, some religious beliefs, but it's not part. You can go through the Bible, you can go through the Quran. You won't find anything that specifically says that women cannot have to be married. But the whole
no, it's a cultural thing. You're right.
Thing, the whole attitude. To it. I mean, the UN Beijing conference. What was it? 15 years ago, which actually was looking essentially at that time at birth control for women. It was a women's conference, and it was looking. And the whole question of women's fertility was blocked essentially by the Vatican, by the US, and by the
Muslim community,
the Asian, if you like, countries. They would not talk about it. Now that's coming on the agenda now, and that's very interesting. And when you look at what's happening with female genitation, that's becoming. So there are these cultural shifts that need to be supported, but not put under the heading of religion, in my view.
No, well, it's separate petals. On the petal, it's called, peace in relation to gender and the family.
Exactly.
It's a whole petal that deals with all the issues you've talked about, which is a separate one to the religion one. I mean, they're all interconnected, obviously, but I think it's useful to differentiate them as well.
It was net.
Yeah.
That's another image.
Sure.
Net. Everything reflects
every other node.
Ad infinitum.
Yes, but somehow we have to make. We have to get some clarity in which bits of the net need repairing first. If we're going to catch the dreams. Ros, would you like to share some of your travels? If I pass the talking stick, because you've been off to Vienna, haven't you?
Yes.
Can you share with the group some of what you've been doing?
Yeah,
That'd be very exciting.
In beginning of December, there was the third conference held by the Austrian government this time. The last one was in Mexico in February, and the one before that was in March 2013 in Oslo.
Right.
These are a series of conferences.
And you went to the Oslo one?
I went to Oslo as well. Yeah. And it was on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, because this is a new initiative really since 2010, when the final statement at the conference in New York said that countries really had to look at their obligations under international humanitarian law and acknowledge the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use or detonation of nuclear weapons. So that was May 2010, and there's been these 3 series of conferences to put that thinking into action, not specifically to be a forum for negotiating anything, but to be somewhere where experts could come and share the facts. And this has been a process that has increasing momentum from the countries that do not have any nuclear weapons, because it is seen as a human right to have a safe world, an environment, and it is acknowledged that there would be no world left for anybody if anyone, or if there was an accident anywhere. And the only way to have this safe world, or to be sure that a nuclear weapon would not be used or detonated, is to eliminate them all. So this is a movement to essentially prohibit nuclear weapons that's come out of these 3 conferences, and to outlaw them. So there should be negotiations to bring about a treaty that would prohibit the use and production of nuclear weapons.
And storage.
Yeah. And Norway, as you've mentioned, Norway is extremely supportive of that. Switzerland is, Mexico is. There are 155
and Austria?
countries. Austria has just pledged at the end of this last conference on the 9th of December to bring about, I think the exact wording was to plug the gap in international law that allows them to be legal. So, because that's been very much the fruit of the conversation, talking about the impact of weapons that you could not possibly consider to be humane in any way, and chemical and biological weapons having already been abolished by treaty, that this is a process that the non-nuclear weapon states are determined to take forward with or without the nuclear weapon countries.
So the meeting on the table outside, which was just sort of tied of the World Court project, which I remember Tom being involved with. Is that still good?
That's a very good question.
George?
Well, no, the leader was George's name on it.
Well, George was sort of invited to this meeting.
Okay. I'm not personally involved with the World Court project anymore. But the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons is very active. It would incorporate World Court project as it incorporates the CND and all other organisations working for the abolition of nuclear weapons. What is very interesting and very relevant to the World Court is the fact that the Marshall Islands have brought out lawsuits against the non-nuclear weapons countries. And so they are going to the International Court of Justice, which has been much the debate among certain people to do with the World Court project.
So who was actually in Vienna? I mean, was it NGOs, was it governments, diplomats, or both?
Well, I attended the Civil Society Forum, which was the 2 days event before the government conference. And the government conference, it was the first time that the UK and the US attended.
Really? Who did we send?
It previously.
Who did we send from the UK? Do you know?
Yes, somebody Lejeune. Susan Lejeune.
Okay. Who's that?
Foreign
office person.
Susan the Young.
Okay.
She's a permanent diplomat talking to Austria, I think.
Okay.
Like that. I didn't meet her personally.
Right.
I wasn't actually in the government conference, but I was around it. And yes, they had a showing of a film, The Man Who Saved the World, which should be coming out, and is very effective in terms of it being the story, telling the story about the Russian colonel who refused to push the button when there was a very serious alarm. And that was 1983. I mean, there are many stories, but this is a very graphic...
It's a true story.
It's a true story. Right. And it has the individual himself going from Russia. They show him speaking at the United Nations. I was in a cinema with people who'd been there at the United Nations when he spoke to them. So it was, it's very impactful.
What was his name?
Stevan Petrov.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's ongoing. And what's the next step then? Is there going to be a...
diplomatic advisor to the Marshall Islands at the moment in terms of catering to their environmental concerns to the United Nations. He's their interlocutor with the United Nations.
Your friend?
Carl.
Yeah.
Is there any link there that I could help you with?
I'm sure there is. It's very interesting because we met the Foreign Minister of Marshall Islands at both conferences. He actually received the award, the Sean McBride Peace Award, from the International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms. I went to their events on the Friday. They were in Vienna. So they awarded the Marshall Islands their Peace Prize. And I was interested because that section of the peace movement is very much Rhino Brown, and he is a co-chair of the International Peace Bureau with another lady who was there. So there's obviously sort of a few overlaps.
All right. Well then, sure. I wonder, is it not possible? I don't know that the UK could support this project officially. I mean, what would it take for the United Kingdom to say, yes, we agree, nuclear weapons are actually inhuman and totally devastating, and therefore we want to get rid of ours as soon as possible. But, no, hang on. But we'll only get rid of them if everyone else gets rid of them.
Well, I think that's the position more or less.
Yeah, but and actually has a conference on that, and it's called the Let's All Get Rid of Them Together conference. Yeah. Can't we organise that?
Well, that's the Standing Committee on Disarmament in the United Nations.
Yeah, but it doesn't do anything, does it?
Well, that is the problem because the states don't.
I know what I'm saying. What if there was a change of heart and we actually did something?
But that's because there's a fundamentally, it is a philosophical point of view, which is essentially the view amongst the establishment
that we need them
stability is essential to human progress, and the competition in its most extreme form is warfare. That this is right and valid and justified in terms of human progress.
I think there has to be an
I think that's a bit outmoded, that one.
Yeah, the Marshall Islands has a lot of people coming forward giving evidence because of the devastating results of the nuclear testing. And a lot of, birth defects continuing and horrible illnesses. I mean, it was just graphic. There were 2 days of this kind of evidence, as there has been in Mexico and Oslo, and the US and the UK representatives were forced to listen, of course, to that. What will be interesting is that the Marshall Islands cases will start having hearings within the next 12 months. And it's getting the information across to the public, I think, is absolutely key. Because I think talking about shifts, it is that absolute shift of the norm. When they abolished slavery, they also had to do this.
It was an educational shift.
Absolutely, obviously against everybody's interest, spending all of this money in such a way. And you cannot possibly say legally that they're pursuing disarmament in good faith when they want to spend billions more and make them even, the likelihood of them being
was China. What's the
by
future of China's nuclear weapons program? Were they at this conference?
No.
Were they
the only nuclear weapons states attending before have been India and Pakistan, and now it's US, and then the UK came probably because the US very belatedly.
So India, Pakistan, US, UK were kind of beginning to nibble. But China and Israel?
I think they were more likely beginning to go and say, hey, let's see what's going on here.
Right.
So how can they possibly turn up in New York? Because that's the big conference coming up.
Is
the
it?
5-yearly NPT conference is coming back. And they have to say they've produced the action plan. And that those 3 conferences were on the basis of the final statement.
But why on that basis didn't China go? Do they feel no compunction whatsoever?
I don't think China signed the NPT, has it? Anyway.
China has, I'm sure.
You think it has signed? I'm not sure. Okay. Well, it's an issue. But then they would have a legal reason not wanting to go because they're not signatories.
Is Israel not a signature?
No.
You see, going back to Mike's point, and Henry Kissinger just wrote a book about the complete collapse of world order. There is an old-fashioned view that nuclear weapons kept order in the world.
Right.
And I mean, what do we have to do? Wait for them to die off?
But I think this conversation affects us all. This idea that we have to wait, and this idea is absolutely not the attitude of the people attending these conferences. Because we're going to do this.
No, they're impatient.
We're going to do this anyway. There was impatience in the civil society conference about getting an next process, which is what your question was. So the next stage is very much seen as, well, when are we going to actually see the start of these negotiations for this planned treaty? And that was the significance that people felt was the Austrian government pledging to fill those gaps that was obviously there, so that they could get these negotiations off the ground.
Have you done a written report about the order?
I haven't.
Can you do one?
Yeah.
Can you send me one?
Okay.
I mean, I've written up most of the stuff I've talked about, and if anyone wants a copy of it, I write it up as sort of annual report. I can email it to you. It's not finished yet. I'm halfway through. There's so much to write up. But I'll send it to you. Yeah, Shanti.
I'll get it for anyone who wants
Okay. Yeah. Tea. And also we've got to toast Eileen in about 10 minutes with a glass of sherry. Okay. Yeah. Oh. And then, sorry.
That conference didn't happen. I know the conference didn't happen, but the same blockages as to why that conference didn't happen.
What was the conference that didn't happen?
Nuclear-free Middle East.
Oh, yes, yes.
Nuclear-free Middle East.
Yeah, and you were excited about it, and then it didn't happen.
There's been 3 attempts to have a conference.
I think we just got to have a nuclear-free world. Just go for broke.